Hello, everyone out there on Facebook. Welcome to EP Lunchtime Chats. This is where we give you a little peek into the conversations that happen behind the scenes at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And today we're going to talk about howling and laughing and singing and harumphing and grunting and snorting and crying and yelling and shouting. Basically, all the sounds that humans make with their voice that are not talking. The language researcher, Dr. Sophie Scott from the University College of London, once said that with the possible exception of whales, because we don't really out there on Facebook. Welcome. The human voice is the most complicated sound in nature. And to demonstrate that, our panelists, everyone you see on our screen is an educator performer at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I'm going to introduce them, and they're going to share with us the weirdest sound that they can make. So let's start with Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Everly, and I think the weirdest noise I can make is pig squeal. Like,
That's really good. Oh, wow. If you hadn't been on video, I would have thought you were faking it and you had a pig nearby. And how about Chelsea?
Okay, so I make this sound by making an air pocket underneath my tongue and then like pushing the air out, and it sounds like
this. Amazing. There's some special effect Foley artists need for that sound. Keep that ready. And Monica.
Hi. I don't know if this is necessarily the weirdest one, but my favorite sound to make are all of the like bilabial sounds. So like
amazing. And that really is a great introduction to a lot of the weird sounds that we can make in the different categories. And a lot of things are based off imitating animals and the world around us. One non-linguistic verbal sound we are hearing a lot these days is right around 8 p.m. Lots of people are going outside and howling. Chelsea, what's up with that?
Yeah, so me and my boyfriend Bryce started a Facebook group called Go Outside and Howl at 8 p.m. And it kind of blew up, and now a lot of people are doing that. So I think that when we started it, it was really just like this. We didn't think too much about it. It was like an instinctual thing. And we were like, let's see if we can get people to go outside and howl. That would be funny. And then it became so popular so fast. I think in the first 24 hours, we had like 8,000 people on the Facebook group. And so we kind of retroactively realized why it seems to matter so much to people. And, you know, wolves and coyotes howl as a form of long distance communication, as a way to feel connected to each other when they're not within each other's presence. And so I think that people are doing it because they feel really isolated right now and kind of disconnected from one another. And the cool thing about howling and a lot of the things we're talking about today is that it can be a stand-in for an emotion that you don't have words for. And I think that a lot of people right now are experiencing things that maybe they've never experienced before, and they might not have the vocabulary to describe what they're feeling. Or maybe you do have the words, like maybe you can say like, I got laid off today, for example. But to just say the words isn't really enough to emote it. And so people are putting a lot of different emotions into their howling. And so some of the howls sound really sad, and some of them sound really angry, and some of them sound really cathartic. But I think it's mostly just serving as an outlet for people to express something that they don't have words for.
Amazing. And that's one of the things when we start to look into human non-linguistic vocal repertoire, like that from a title of a science journal. I didn't come up with those words. Is a lot of these things, like probably laughter and screaming and howling and all these things, probably predate language. And language is kind of built on top of this level of communication you already had, and it's pretty universal, which is why even if you hear or see some piece of art from a culture you don't know anything about in a language you've never heard before, you can usually connect with it in some way. Right, Alex?
That's right, Mitch. Yeah, that actually, what Chelsea was saying made so much sense to me because the kids to who live to the right of my house, they do the howl, but then it usually devolves into just yelling for about another 15 minutes, which they get a big kick out of. And something that I was really interested in is listening to music or other media where you don't understand what's being said on an intellectual level. So, I mean, for instance, even in English, I don't really like know all the words to my favorite songs. I know I'm like a horrible music fan, but I just miss some of them. And I listen to music from other cultures and other languages, and musics with intentionally obscure lyrics, like more extreme forms of music where, you know, you're going, you're not supposed to understand, right? But it's that idea of you're expressing something to other people in a way that's maybe a little more at the emotional core of what you're getting out. Because if you just told your friends the lyrics to a metal song, you're like, oh man, I really just want to take my fist and punch it into a wall. And that's the most PG metal lyrics I can think of. They'd be like, oh, okay, weird. But when you're able to express what's really going on for you inside, then suddenly it becomes much more accessible to a lot of people.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is when you look at these things like laughing and howling and yelling and screaming, we're all doing it all the time. We're all communicating all of this emotional information when we talk or emote or whatever, and we're not doing it consciously. We probably can't even single out what we're doing. I should have mentioned this earlier, but if you're watching us on Facebook, please comment. We'd love to hear if you have any questions or comments. We've got a couple people howling in the comments already, and some charter members to go outside and howl 8 p.m. group. Now, the other thing I think is interesting is like we've been laughing seems to be even pre-human. Other non-human apes laugh, rats laugh. It's not a completely unique thing for us. But then when we start developing language, and especially written language, we try to encode these things and sort of like put them in an abstract form. And Monica, you speak 5 languages. Have you come across any interesting ways people encode laughing or grunting or snorting or any of those things?
Yeah. So definitely in each different language, there's different ways that you will, like in writing, demonstrate laughing or grunting or any of these like sounds that we make, like not quite filler sounds, although those are also their own category, but all of these other sounds that aren't necessarily part of the language. And that can probably be just attributed to how we develop, like each culture developed their writing system and their language system in that case. So a lot of the times, so like, for example, laughing, like you were saying, it sounds pretty much the same. I couldn't tell the difference between somebody laughing in French and somebody laughing in English, right? But they're spelled differently. And that's necessarily how we like denote sounds in each different culture. But what I found is super cool is that, so like human language sounds, every human can make these sounds, but every language definitely doesn't use all of the sounds. Like if you guys have ever been listening to something in a different language or somebody speaking in a different language, hear some weird sound and you like try to imagine to yourself, like, how did that happen? Where did the air go in their mouth? Like, how did they actually express that sound? Even though every single human being has the same structure physically to make all of these sounds, the way that our languages have developed is very distinctive, and each of them have their own like grouping of sounds. And like the human language is made up of like 100 something, I believe. I don't know the exact number, but those are like all of the IPA sounds, the International Phonetic Alphabet sounds. And then each language has like only a small subsection of those that they actually use, which is super cool.
Interesting. When did we all choose? What's it is really interesting to wonder why people do that. Like, I know there's some research that these are just American accents, but in the South, people tend to talk slower because it's so hot there. And there are some, as touching on something I don't really know enough about to keep talking about. We have some comments. Becca is talking about how in different languages we encode animal sounds so differently. Like in Russian, dogs say goff goff, which I've heard a dog say goff goff for sure. Mina says newborn babies cry differently in different languages. That's so weird. How do they know? Yeah, so that's the amazing thing is like, and looking back, there was some recent research that we may have had the full range, the full vocal range of humans have now in like 460,000 years ago, which means that cavemen and Neanderthals were probably singing. Just out of curiosity, what do we think they were singing about? I see Chelsea thinking,
food. Something like that. I was just gonna say that I love the way in Brazilian Portuguese there's a bunch of different ways to laugh, and my favorite one is just writing K a bunch of times, like K K K K K K K. And at first I was like, that's not what laughing sounds like, but then I was like, oh, it totally is, because it's like it's like that kind of laughing.
Yeah, as a huge comic book nerd, I feel like one of the great contributions to the world that comic books have made is the attempt to spell a lot of the weird noises that happen. Tali was talking about, again, animal noises in different languages. I know we have a colleague, Jose, who likes to talk about how in Norway, I think, horses say rinsk. Do you know of any other?
I think that's Polish, if I remember what we have on the wall. But another one is cats in Japan say nya instead of meow. And they also have different onomatopoeia, like you were talking about with comic books. For instance, kabedan is the sound of slamming your hand up against a wall, which I don't think we have an onomatopoeia for here. But
And I think that a lot of those differences are like in the sounds that you hear animals make if you natively speak this language or that language is due to that set of sounds that that language uses. So you end up becoming used to that set of sounds, especially like the older you get, which is also why it's much harder to learn languages when you're older, because you're already so used to hearing the sounds that you're used to hearing and also saying them, like making those shapes with your mouth. But that's why I think you end up hearing those sounds in animals, and like in a cat meowing, you know, you like in English, maybe the sound like the phrasing nya isn't very common. So you might not hear a cat say nya and it's meow, because those are more sounds that are like common in the English language, is my best guess.
yeah, and something that's really interesting is you actually lose a lot of your phonetic ability based on the language you learn as you grow up, right? If for white people who have taken Spanish classes, you know that many white people can't roll their R's, right? And a lot of English speakers can't make sounds in languages like Farsi or things that involve more like kind of sounds. But this isn't like the case with necessarily all people, because some people postulate that people who speak Khoisan languages, which is a language group in like South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, actually are able to use almost the entire phonetic range of human expression, which is pretty cool.
Cool. It's so cool that we're using these complicated instruments. I'm going to quote the language researcher, Dr. Sophie Scott, again, because she said one of my favorite things anyone's ever said. She said that the human tongue has more in common with the tentacle of an octopus than the tongue of any other animal. Which leads to another interesting question. Why, and communication is probably the answer, but why have we evolved such complicated systems that we're able to make all sorts of different sounds? Amanda on Facebook is wondering if anyone knows of any musical instruments that were created specifically to imitate either human or animalistic sounds.
Jimi Hendrix's guitar. He can make his guitar say things.
That's right.
No, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I'm going to look that up. And then Sarah says that her husband speaks French and English, and she can tell which he is speaking without hearing him just by the way he's moving his mouth. And as an actor, I can relate to that because when I've had to learn different accents, you place the sound in different places in your mouth. Like if you do an Irish accent, it's very much in the lips, and your lips are sore in the first few days of rehearsal. But there's more than just these sounds that are universal. There's all sorts of body language. And again, I think it's so cool that there's like a secret human language underneath all other culture and language that we can all understand universally. But Chelsea, I know you were looking into some stuff about smile mirroring in different cultures.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because like down in Honduras and in a lot of countries, people don't smile when they take pictures. They like try to look very like serious, you know. And every time I go down to Honduras, the people I'm with are trying to convince everyone that they should smile in the photo. And I was reading about that, and there was an article. It was about laughing and smiling in different cultures, and it was based on the uncertainty avoidance index. So some cultures basically avoid uncertainty more, like Germany, right? Like the trains in Germany are always on time. Things are more planned out, more accurate. And then there's other cultures in which uncertainty is such a big part of their everyday life that things are so unexpected. Maybe it's partially the way the environment is, like the natural environment. It might also be part of the culture of the government. You might not know if you're going to be able to eat one day or another. And countries that have a high amount of uncertainty tend to think that smiling and laughing makes you seem foolish or silly. And so it's not as valued as countries that have a higher level of certainty in their everyday lives, where for them, like smiling is a form of pleasantry and relating. And so I think that like that can also be reflected in the way that people laugh and the amount of laughter that happens. And so it's just part of this is just like a social learning thing. Kind of interesting.
Laughing is so interesting because we all do it all the time, probably even more than you think, and you do it most of the time for probably different reasons than you think. Most of the laughing we do is not in response of something funny. It is something we do to communicate to the people we're talking to and the people around us that we're all connected and we're all on the same page. And in a group conversation, the person who laughs the most is the person talking. Not because they're laughing at their own jokes, although, except in some cases. But like, that's just something that like, it's so interesting how these things we do all the time might be doing things that we're unconsciously doing. We don't know what we're doing, but we're doing it really well. We're like masters of things we don't even understand. So in the comments, people have pointed out that the talking drum can sound like it's talking. Mina says the trombone has the same range as the human voice. That's so cool. Becca says she saw some cool instruments in Peru that sounded like a lot of different animals. This is so fun. What a great group of commenters. Talia wants everyone to know that if you say the word crisp, you start by engaging parts of the back of your mouth and throat and move progressively forward. Crisp. That's so cool. You can kind of feel it. So yeah, there's...
I have a question for everybody because I wasn't able to really get the answer to this. All right. So you know how Monica was talking about how we culturally learn the sounds and we kind of superimpose the sounds of different animals based on what we're taught. Well, that kind of made me think about superimposed feelings as related to different words. We know that there's like certain words that don't translate directly into different languages. Like in Portuguese, saudade is a famous word that they say there's not really an English term for it. And for me, I don't think I ever really experienced saudade until I learned the word. I learned what the word meant. And then from knowing that word, I was able to understand what it feels like. And I wonder if we have like if there's feelings out there that we just don't have words for, so we're not able to connect with them and identify them.
going to say yes. Because that's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, it's such an interesting exploration of like the internal way that we experience the world and then the way that we abstract it and communicate about the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you read articles about like laughing and talking and yawning and snorting and grinning and things, you really start to feel like you're doing those things, but you haven't really thought about them. So yeah, yeah. Does anyone else know of words in other languages that don't really have English equivalents?
So kind of going off of that, not quite answering your question, but definitely I was reading, I don't remember exactly where the article was, but a little while ago, that people who speak multiple languages, like on a fluent or near fluent level, will have almost like different personalities in each of the languages, which is like based off of I assume, the types of words that exist in those languages. So in a language that's maybe more straightforward, you would be like a little bit more straightforward and more like brisk. And in a language that's more flowery and has all of these like meandering thought lines, like Romance languages, that usually kind of like start in one spot and then end up somewhere completely different because of the way that the language works, will have like a different personality in that language than in a different language like that.
So is that true for you, Monica? Like, could you just describe, is your personality different in different languages?
So that's a great question. I'm inclined to say yes, although I think it's a little bit difficult to realize when you are the one speaking the language. But yeah, I mean, I think my two like most fluent languages are Spanish and English. But I definitely would say kind of in English, it's a little bit more, I wouldn't say, I guess, like straightforward, but like in English, it's almost more direct. Whereas in Spanish, it's like I was talking about, kind of like this meandering pathway to get where you want to go. And you can like more easily interject other tangents in what you're saying in Spanish, than in English in general, at least speaking from like Mexican Spanish and American English. So.
I think that's so interesting when it's combined with culture. It becomes really like noticeable, because I don't think I know enough Japanese to have an identity separate from my English speaking self. But being in Japan and speaking Japanese as an American, I'm kind of forced into certain roles because of the culture combined with the language. Even if you're saying the right thing and you say, excuse me, just like you would in America, it might come across like, whoa, geez, calm down, buddy. I'm right here, calm down, American. So I feel like it just gets all tangled together and kind of forced on you in certain ways.
Oh, cool. Trelaw would like everyone to know that if the language you learn causes the muscles in your mouth to develop differently. I lost the comment, so I apologize if I'm misquoting you, Trelaw. So people who speak more languages have more ambidextrous vocal apparati. And use those words. And then Mina points out that the names of colors in different languages have been shown to influence, it's hard to tell if it's how people perceive color, but it influences how they describe the colors that they see, which is very interesting.
Yeah, for instance, in Japanese, there's not a word for light blue. You just call it green.
And I was reading also that in like earlier languages, there wasn't a word for blue. So like, for example, in like ancient Greek texts, you'll hear like poets refer to the ocean as wine dark. So like a kind of purpley wine color, because there wasn't the word for that shade of blue.
Oh, he was also a poet, so no, I'm just kidding. Maybe he was talking around. No, there's very good evidence. I was just joking. Becca points out there's a word in Albanian not pronounced like this, but merzit, which means something like being bored or annoyed or upset, but also none of those things. She, like Chelsea, didn't understand the feeling until she heard the word.
So I listened to this really cool Invisibilia podcast where this dude went to the Philippines and he was trying to translate the language of a tribe. And there was this word, I wrote it down. The word is liget. And he was like, what does this word mean? And they would be like, oh, look at this guy like bounding down the trail. He looks like he could chop down 10 trees today. He's got liget. And he'd be like, okay, so like energetic and like enthusiastic. And then one time they heard him, he had the recording of a voice of someone who had died. And everyone in the tribe got very, very angry at him. And they were like, this gives us liget. And he was like, what is this word, liget? And then he was in the Philippines and a very tragic thing happened. His wife had a big fall from a high cliff and she died. And he was like stunned and he went back to the United States and months went by. And then he was like on a freeway in California and he felt the sudden need to like pull over on the side of the road. And he got out of his car and he just started howling. And he said that he felt this like energy resonating through his whole body. And the tribe had also said that when they get liget, they sometimes circle together and howl and make these like sounds. And so for him in that moment, he felt like he finally understood this word. And his translation for the word is high voltage. And so somebody from the Invisibilia podcast reached out to me and they were like, listen to this because I think this is why people are howling. It's because they're feeling like it. So I thought that was pretty crazy.
Amazing. Wow. Yeah, that's such an interesting it's so cool that so many people here and also in our Facebook chat have had that experience of growing to understand a concept they didn't have the language to describe. I don't think I have an experience like that, but I'm going to try. I'm going to look for liget and merzit and that other one. Apparently I did a good job pronouncing it the first time. Not sure about the second time. We have a couple people who say that they are funnier in Spanish than in English. Monica, are you funnier in one language or another?
Personally, I think probably English. But honestly, that's probably just because English is the language I use with my friends and Spanish is the language I use with my mother.
Talia points out the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. It's in the comments if you want to see how that's spelled, which is that the language that you use changes how you interact with and experience the world. Yeah, it's such a cool concept. It reminds me of something in a comic that I read once where somebody goes on a vacation and they come back. It's called Moomin Valley. I can't remember the country it's from. But someone is about to tell the experience of their vacation and they stop and they're like, well, I don't want to talk about what happened because as soon as I start talking about it, the experience becomes the words and the actual experience is gone and only the abstraction remains.
I feel like that about some of my childhood stories. Like I've told them so many times, it's like a copy of a copy of a copy.
There's a great word for a copy of a copy of a copy, and it's simulacra, since we're sharing some of our favorite words. And that's actually more like, you know how if you have a grape-flavored bubblegum, and it does not taste anything like grapes, but then if you taste something that tastes like grape bubblegum, you'll be like, that's grape-flavored. Simulacra. Recognizing the artificial thing based on the original thing as the... Anyway. All right, we're coming down to the end of our time here. Any final thoughts? Alex, you had something to say.
Oh, yeah. So I believe Moomin is Finnish. And that reminded me of, I was reading an interview with a band from Finland. And most people in Finland speak English, and a lot of them don't speak Finnish at all. It's kind of an archaic language. But they wanted to write their lyrics in Finnish, which they don't speak, to give their music a kind of mythical historical feel to them, right? Like an aesthetic that kind of transports you. And I think that's one of the to just bring it back to music for a sec, one of the really cool things about listening to music in another language is it can communicate something about the culture or the place itself in ways that you maybe couldn't get just from reading about the place.
Music could be a whole other topic, because that's another thing that is so ingrained in our existence. And we really, when you stand back and get all intellectual about it, nobody can agree on why we make music or when we started making music or what purposes it necessarily serves. Although all of us individually, I'm sure, have very strong feelings about the importance and the value of music and why we do it. Any other final thoughts? Chelsea?
I just think it's cool that you can tickle rats and they laugh. I know you already said that, but that's so cool.
I should mention that they laugh at a frequency that you can't hear. You have to record it and like modulate it so you can hear it. But it's true. If you tickle rats, they laugh. And if they want to be tickled, they will make that laughter sound so that researchers know that they would like to be tickled right now. The world we have more in common with rats than we thought. All right, well, we're just about out of time here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This was so much fun. And hopefully, I know I have a lot of things that a lot of articles I want to go read and words I want to look up right now. Hopefully you do too. We'll be back next Tuesday at noon, and we'll be talking about the Denver Museum of Nature and Science Curiosity Cruiser, where we get people to get into a truck and eat weird things, and very weird things that do have bizarre effects on your taste buds and your mouthfeel and all sorts of stuff. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Stay safe, and yeah, have a great day.